November 121 Mike, your turn. Taxiing 111.
Hi, I'm Mike Thompson, and welcome to 121 Point Mike Ground School. Flying requires power, and that comes from fuel. Well, for now. Your examiner might ask you during your oral or practical how your engine works, and you'd better know. Beyond this, you need to know how it works so that you can diagnose and fix problems. So, at the simplest level, you burn fuel to create thrust. Thrust is created by turning a propeller, which flings a lot of air backwards really fast. And the propeller is turned by the engine. Let's talk about four-stroke gasoline engines first. Gasoline engines burn gasoline, or petrol for you Brits. In order to burn something, you need a fire triangle: fuel, oxygen, heat, and an ignition source. The fuel is the fuel. The oxygen comes from the air, which is about 20% oxygen, and the heat and the ignition source are the spark plug. Now, back to the strokes. What you need to remember is suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Those are the four steps of an internal combustion engine. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Or intake, compression, power, and exhaust. Those are the four strokes of an internal combustion four-stroke engine. A piston moves up and down inside of a cylinder, and the piston is connected to a rod, which turns a crank. The crank is on a crankshaft, and that then is connected to the propeller. The engine converts the liquid fuel into hot gas, which produces linear motion, which gets converted into rotary motion to turn the propeller. Yeah, it's not a very efficient process, but it's the best compromise we've got for small planes, and cars, and lawnmowers, and a lot of things. On the intake stroke, a valve opens to let the air and fuel into the in as the piston moves down, right? And this gets all sucked in there. And then the intake valve closes. Then it gets compressed as the piston moves back up. The spark plug fires just before the piston reaches the top. Let's say it's 4 degrees before top dead center. The spark ignites the fuel, and it burns very quickly, and this expands the air rapidly, shoving the piston back down. And that's the power stroke. Now the exhaust valve opens, and the piston pushes all that used stuff out of the cylinder, and the process begins again. Okay, so you only get power 25% of the time, but a small trainer plane probably has 4 cylinders, so you're getting power 100% of the time, but only from 25% of the engine. The firing order, of course, is adjusted to smooth out the flow. They don't all fire at the same time, but 90 degrees apart. Larger planes are going to have 6 or 8 cylinders, and their firing orders and crank angles are adjusted to smooth out the power flow even further. More cylinders is a smoother ride, but that's the basics of how the engine works. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Now, when we talk about RPM, that's how quickly the crankshaft is rotating, right? And the engineers decided long ago that for direct drive 4-stroke engines, 2,700 max RPM is a good compromise. And that's basically what we still use today, more or less. 2,700 RPM means that the crankshaft is spinning an incredible 45 times per second. So you get a complete revolution in 2 strokes, and that's an up and a down, right? And so there are massive stresses going on inside there. It's a miracle they work at all. Now, you might be flying behind a Rotax engine, which is still 4-stroke, but they rev several thousand RPM higher than Lycomings or Continentals. And because of this, there's a propeller speed reduction unit on the front, so the propeller doesn't turn that fast. Propellers get very inefficient at high RPM, and as they approach sonic speeds at the tips, they get very loud, and the centrifugal force would just be unbearable. And so, propellers are usually limited to about 2,700. Okay, so that's the how and the why basics, but your instructor is going to want you to know more than that, all right? And you should. And here it comes. Car engines only have 1 spark plug per cylinder, but the airplanes have 2. The main reason for this is redundancy and safety, because 2 sparks, like beavers, are better than 1. It burns the fuel better and makes a bit more power. Now, each spark plug is connected to either a magneto or to the electronic ignition system. Magnetos are driven by the engine, and they don't need electrical power to fire, like a lawnmower. There are 2 magnetos, each driving 4 spark plugs for a 4-cylinder engine. If you have electronic ignition, You won't have the weight of the magnetos, but you're going to need a reliable source of electrical power to make sure that your engine continues to run. If your entire electrical system goes dead, or if you have to kill it, then your engine stops in this case. So, I've heard of people using a one magneto and one electronic system for redundancy. But anyway, that's where the spark comes from. Now, you also need to keep them sparking. And this is one of the problems with 100 low lead fuel that we use. Lead is a cheap and convenient way to boost the octane rating of a fuel. Octane is 8 carbons surrounded by 18 hydrogens, and our octane rating is 100. But a higher octane rating helps reduce knocking. Knocking is combustion before we want it to happen. So what causes that? Well, when you compress the air, or any gas, it gets hot. The engine pulled in air and fuel at the intake stroke, and now as the mix gets compressed, it's heating up. And lower octane fuels might combust before the piston reaches the top, because the compressed air is heated to the point where the fuel can ignite without the spark plug. I'll get to diesels in a minute. If the fuel ignites before the piston gets to top dead center, then it's going to try to shove the piston back down the wrong way, and it's working against the rotation of the engine, causing a knocking sound and putting a lot of additional stress on the engine. Diesel engines don't use spark plugs once they get going. They use the hot compressed air to ignite the fuel. They have higher compression ratios than gasoline engines, so that the air can get hot enough to ignite the fuel on contact. The fuel is injected just before top dead center instead of at the start of the intake stroke. But other than that, they run on the same basic principles of suck, squeeze, bang, blow. A higher compression ratio heats the air more than a lower compression ratio, like 10-to-1 will compress the air 25% more than an 8-to-1 engine will. So, we need a fuel that's more resistant to spontaneous combustion, and that's what the octane rating is all about. Higher compression ratio engines need a higher octane rating to resist knocking. Lead in the fuel gets our fuel up to a rating that we need so that our engines don't knock. Some of you antique car enthusiasts might actually put lead additive into your fuel to get that premium 91 fuel up to the octane rating that you actually need. So, now you know why we have lead in our fuel. But here's why it's a problem. It can foul the spark plugs. When the spark plugs are coated with lead deposits, they don't fire as well, and the fuel doesn't burn as well, and the engine runs rough, and it doesn't make as much power. So what do we do about it? We use the mixture knob to adjust the air-fuel ratio in the engine. If you don't have a mixture knob, congratulations, your engine is smart and it's doing it for you. But odds are you've got a mixture knob. This red knob controls the amount of fuel that goes into the engine. We refer to mixtures as lean or rich. Rich ones have a lot of fuel, like rich people have a lot of money. Lean times are when there isn't as much money, or fuel in this case. The air-fuel ratio needs to be the one that Goldilocks would pick to get complete combustion. If the mixture is out of balance, we're not burning all the fuel that we could or making as much power as we could. So, when your mixture is rich, you have excessive fuel that's not going to burn. And the lead in that fuel is going to stick to the spark plugs and reduce your power. So, you lean the mixture, reducing the fuel flow, and this is going to burn off the deposits after several seconds. Lean mixtures are hotter than rich mixtures, and this extra heat gets rid of the lead deposits. Lean mixtures also save you fuel and money, so we typically cruise around with leaner mixtures. You might have heard people say things like 50 degrees lean or rich of peak. Well, they're simply monitoring the increase in exhaust temperatures as they lean the mix, and at some point, the temperature will begin to fall as the mix gets leaned past the highest temp. Then they're going to adjust the mix from there to hold maybe 50 degrees on the lean or rich side of the peak temp. Simple as that. You will typically run full rich on takeoff to make sure that the engine is generating all the power it needs, and then you're going to lean the mixture as you climb. If you're taking off from somewhere up high, then you might actually lean the engine for takeoff a bit, but I've never had to do that. As you climb, the air gets less dense, so the engine isn't getting as much air, which means that the air-fuel mixture is now wrong. You've got less air relative to the fuel, so you need to lean the mixture as you climb to keep the ratio in balance. You might see that on a test. As you climb, the mixture gets richer due to the decrease in air density. So, lean the engine as you climb, which means pull the red knob out. Rich is forward, lean is back. Lean back, a lean back, a lean back. Got it? Obviously, remember to enrich the mixture as you descend. But what about the throttle? Ah, yes, the black one. Well, that controls how much air is going to the engine. The throttle controls a butterfly valve that lets in varying amounts of air. In a carbureted engine, the rush of air flowing through it also sucks in fuel because of the Venturi effect. A carburetor's throat accelerates the incoming air, and that creates a zone of low pressure, which sucks fuel into the airstream, and it gets all mixed around. More airflow, lower pressure, so more fuel is sucked in, and it's all balanced. The throttle on a carbureted engine controls the airflow, and that in turn asks for fuel, but the mixture controls the final say, which is why you don't pull the mixture control all the way out in flight, because that cuts off the fuel. We only want to do that when we're on the ground and we want to shut the engine down. On a fuel-injected engine, the throttle still controls the airflow, but the injection system regulates how much fuel is injected based on the throttle position. But the mixture still gets the final say. If your engine has full authority digital engine control, or FADEC, like on a Cirrus, you just have a single power lever and your computer is going to adjust the mixture for you. Nice. I remember on my practical test that I was asked what cools the engine, and you might be asked that too. You need to remember that the engine is cooled by three things. First, the air. That's what those big fins on the side of the cylinders do. More airflow equals more cooling. Secondly, they're cooled by oil, so make sure you have enough before flight. Lastly, and somewhat surprisingly, they're cooled by fuel. Richer mixtures run cooler than leaner ones, so you can use the mixture lever to cool your engine if it's running a little hot. You can also increase your airspeed if it's running hot to get more air flowing over the cylinders. You can't add oil in flight though, so you only really have two temperature controls in flight. Well, maybe you have cowl flaps too, but you can only control airflow and fuel. Suck, squeeze, bang, blow. Mixture controls fuel flow, and throttles control airflow. Rich has more fuel, lean has less. Cool with air, oil, and fuel. And go ahead and subscribe if you haven't already. That'll certainly help me out, as we'll leave in a bunch of comments and engaging in lively discussions down below. Hey, what are those? And thanks for staying with me on 121 Point Mike.